Welcome once again to The Link Online. And yes, we are back in studio once again here on The Link. And if you're looking at us on TV, you haven't seen us yet, but if you're listening to us, we're here. We'll be there on TV in just a minute because we're going to make a cross-country tour of Canada. If you're watching us on Facebook, there's all these lovely pictures of Canada's wonderful glory, the mountains, the seas, the prairies, things like that. And there we are, live on TV. And with me today, of course...
Montgomery.
Pardon?
You're making me weep with this description of our country. I'm going to pieces.
Well, earlier, before we got on the air, we were talking about being on tenterhooks because this was we're back in studio after a brief hiatus. And we thought, what the heck is a tenterhook? So if you're watching or listening to us live, look up for us on Google, what is a tenterhook? And text us or something because Marie-Claude Simard is with us, and she's going to be monitoring that, amongst other things. And Terry Haig is with us, of course, and wondering what the heck is going on the other side of the glass. What we're doing is, of course, Marc-André Deschamps and Benoit Durand, and...
The man who makes it all happen.
The man who makes it all happen.
The Mick Jagger of this building.
And
the Tiger Woods, I'm not sure which.
The Emerson Fittipaldi of radio.
That's right.
And TV. It is, of course,
Pierre Dutil.
There we go. Right.
The crowd erupts.
The crowd erupts, indeed. So listen, we have a very interesting show. We're going to have some very serious discussions and somewhat lighter discussions. And Marie-Claude, you have something special for us.
Yes, I will be telling you about a new Canadian world record in the food industry.
All right. Terry, you've got a very serious subject for us today.
Yeah, today is the 74th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki.
Okay, so
3 days after the bombing of Hiroshima.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. Also, bad behavior on the internet. Those videos that people do, silly things or bad things. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And birds of a feather stick together. And how on earth did we go from dinosaurs with their rough skin to birds with feathers that could make them defy gravity? We're going to.
You got a size difference there too.
Well, yeah, but
Not
there were small dinosaurs in the past too. They weren't all big.
Small?
Well, they could have been very small, size of lizards.
Really?
Yeah, there were dinosaurs, but they were lizard size, and there were chicken-sized dinosaurs and dog-sized dinosaurs. So there are all kinds of dinosaurs. Anyway, we're going to find out how they got from that kind of thing to birds that can fly away on the sky. That's coming up on this edition of The Link Online. All right, we're going to start out with that rather serious subject. As Terry mentioned, today is the 74th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, Japan, the second of the two U.S. missions that brought Japan to the peace table to end the Second World War. About 70,000 people died in that attack on Nagasaki immediately. Of course, there were many deaths afterwards as well. This past Tuesday was the anniversary of the more famous bombing, the one in Hiroshima. About 140 died on that day. 140,000, excuse me. And the Roman Catholic monk and theologian Thomas Merton, in his original Child, wrote of Hiroshima, "The bomb exploded within 100 feet of the aiming point. The fireball was 18,000 feet across. The temperature at the center of the fireball was 100 million degrees. The people who were near the center became nothing. The whole city was blown to bits, and the ruins all caught fire instantly everywhere, burning briskly." Now, Terry, you talked to someone who was very much affected by the horrors that resulted from those two bombs.
All of us of a certain age were, in fact. We had to duck and cover in elementary school. There were protests. I mean, it hovered over us. But now as it fades farther...
And don't forget the bomb shelters that
the
people were building.
And now as it fades farther and farther into the distance, you have to wonder if people are still aware of it. I know I'd forgotten what August 6th was and August 9th were this week. I didn't,
Well, you don't forget about the bombings if you're from a certain age, but the exact date.
It's good to remember. Yeah. So I spoke with Paul Hannon. He is the executive director of Minds Action Canada. That's an organization devoted to, quote, working to eliminate the serious humanitarian, environmental, and development consequences of, this is an interesting word, indiscriminate weapons. Okay. During our conversation, I asked him what the dangers are of people forgetting what happened on those 2 August days in 1945.
Well, there's certainly always a danger that people don't remember, and it does seem like it's something that comes from, popular culture, movies about the war, or people just don't realize that the potential is there. It just sort of becomes a fabric of our life, and probably, fortunately, in many ways unfortunately, but fortunately, right now we're in a situation where we have a leader in the United States, a leader in Russia, and a leader in North Korea that are making everybody really nervous. Everybody's focusing on those 3 leaders and the moves that they are making, and the time they spend together, and the sometimes irrational or odd things that they are doing. And in the background of that, and I don't think it really is in the foreground of people's think, but in the background of that is the fact that all of them have their finger on a nuclear weapon, and they could cause tremendous damage both to the environment, but to whatever communities or cities or countries that the weapons are detonated in. So it is really a problem, and I also work on trying to preemptively ban autonomous weapons, what we call killer robots. And that's, the next revolution in warfare after gunpowder and nuclear weapons. And nuclear weapons change the world in ways that nobody could predict. And the same is going to happen with autonomous weapons. If I don't think people are understanding how it's going to change. And most people can't understand because we really don't know how it's going to change our lives if we allow these weapons to be created. But we do know what has happened with nuclear weapons, and that was a mistake. And many of the scientists who created those weapons or were involved in that were shocked when they were used because they thought the threat of having such a powerful weapon would deter anyone from ever using them. But it didn't, and it still doesn't.
That nuclear clock, or that doomsday clock that used to be, I think it was either on 8th Avenue or 9th Avenue in Manhattan. Where does that stand right now? Are we closer now? Are we farther away now? What's your take, especially given what you just said about the 3 leaders with their fingers, each with his finger on the nuclear button?
I think we're closer than we've ever been to a nuclear war. There are, we now have 9 states that have them, but we have at least 3 of them who are really getting, trying to get, there's too much bravado going on, too much testosterone happening in the way they interact, and they are slowly dismantling the structures that we've put in place to try and make sure that these weapons are never used again, both Russia and China walking.
Okay, that's not exactly the clip that we wanted, but that's what live radio and live television is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, remember those days when we have to improvise? Anyway,
but yeah, it's just...
he said it all. He said he's very hopeful about the young people today because they're so tuned in to the environmental issues, and then he thinks that people are not going to forget it. I mean, like the little girl in Stockholm we talked about Emma Gonzalez, the young lady in Portland, Florida. So he's slightly optimistic that the kids are going to grab onto this issue along with the environmental because they're into survival, and that in fact, we're talking about Paul Hannon here, the head of Minds Action Canada, that. Well, we'll never know, but it only takes one. There's 9 countries now, I believe, that have access to a nuclear bomb. So you never know what. It only takes in one order, right?
Well, somebody. You have, for example, India and Pakistan, both nuclear powers.
Kashmir again, yeah.
And they're back again arguing about Kashmir. They have been at war before, and
So we'll
it's
see.
a delicate situation.
We'll see. God knows. That description by Thomas Merton tells you. 100 million degrees the heat. I mean, temperature. The fireball, 100 million degrees. Heat. I mean, it's incomprehensible. Really,
well, it totally is. Absolutely. So anyway, that's the anniversary dates of one of the world-changing historical events. As we said in the beginning, it's an event that changed the world.
Absolutely.
Greatest historical event, tragedy, not necessarily the greatest tragedy, but because, I mean, for example, you had the fire bombings of Tokyo, in which totally conventional, but 100,000 people were killed.
Really?
You know,
Okay.
see, but we don't remember that.
No,
So,
no.
and we had the firebombing.
Dresden.
The Allies firebombed Dresden. 25,000 at least in that incident. You know, so you know. Anyway, there you go.
It's never happened again, at least so far.
So far, and we'll keep our
74
fingers
years.
crossed. All right, let's move on. Wouldn't it be great to be able to play the piano like that well? You know.
Yeah, he's not bad. He's the greatest piano player of all time, maybe.
How many of you have seen bad stuff on the internet? People doing stupid things or just really, you know, bad things like, you know.
Yeah, I
Have you
try
seen
to
that?
avoid. I mean, I see them, but I don't click on the play button.
Smart move.
Yeah, okay, well, recently in Western Canada, someone posted a video online of another person walking up to a stranger and throwing a cup of coffee in the stranger's face, and then they run away and they're laughing and everything else. Now, presumably, the prank video was performed and posted as something that was supposed to be funny and about some, you know, perhaps to try to get some likes online and get some increased popularity, perhaps. Instead, however, most of the online reaction was negative against the act and the person posting the video. In turn, that person said, "Hey, why blame me? I was just the one filming. I didn't throw the coffee." Well, Gord Pennycook is an assistant professor of behavioral science at the University of Regina, and he says, however, that the person filming such antisocial behavior is indeed as responsible because without their involvement, the act probably wouldn't happen.
Makes sense.
So in this excerpt, I asked him what he thought when he first saw the video of this particular so-called prank.
Well, I mean, the first thing I thought was, sadly, this seems kind of typical or all too common. Although this one is in particular kind of interesting because the people who put it on the internet just really did not read the audience. You know, they made the video because they thought that it would be funny, and that really backfired on them, obviously.
And in fact, they sort of, you could hear them on that video sort of chuckling to themselves, thinking that this was a funny act. The person said, "Well, what are you blaming me for? I wasn't the one who threw the coffee. I was just the one who was filming."
Yeah, it seems like I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. That seems like the same kind of reasoning I get out of them. The event happened because the video was being taken. In this case, obviously, what they were doing was trying to create a video, you know, so they could put online and get some laughs out of it. What that means is the person who took the video is as responsible for the event as the person who threw the coffee, right? Because without the video, if he didn't have his phone on him or whatever, the thing doesn't happen, and so he's responsible for it. If you're playing a causal role in the immoral act, then you have a moral responsibility for it.
What you're saying is, without the filming, there would likely have been no act then.
That's right, and so therefore the person who's filming is responsible for the act, even though he did not directly, you know, do it. Right? He was still responsible for it.
Now, there's another case which you're probably aware of that made national headlines of a young woman throwing chairs off a high-rise building onto the street below. Extremely dangerous and extremely foolish. And her lawyer is saying, well, she was goaded into it. It was peer pressure. And again, this was something that was filmed. So what do you say to that kind of argument?
In the case of the coffee, it seems like a planned act, and they were complicit in the plan, right? And if that was the case for the chairs, then I would say, you know, probably they should have some sort of responsibility. I don't know what the, you know, in terms of what the charges should be. I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, but you know, peer pressure could come from the people that she was with, but also she might feel peer pressure from her whatever audience on Instagram or whatever it was. And that's kind of the problem, is that people view that as an abdication of their responsibility. Someone was trying to pressure me into this, but if they feel like they're getting peer pressure from their so-called audience online, then that could be used to justify any matter of bad behavior. I don't think it's a very strong defense, to be honest with you. And you know, everybody who's involved has some responsibility. Certainly, if they were goading her on, or if she wouldn't have done it without the video, yeah, they're responsible for sure.
What is it about the internet that is prompting these kinds of bad behaviors?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, the internet allows us to have an audience that we wouldn't normally have. Even for the most heinous of things, there's usually some sort of maybe small but still accessible target audience. So people can get the the feedback that they want, which is, this is great, this is funny, whatever, for things that wouldn't normally be viewed as entertaining for normal people, right? And the other issue is that when we use technology, we allows us to kind of detach ourselves from reality a little bit, right? Like when we engage with people anonymously on the internet, we are far more rude than we would be in person. When we're on social media, we construct new personas, make our lives seem more interesting than they are. And so we kind of use technology sometimes to just distance ourselves from our own kind of reality. It comes down to just because we have the technology and the internet doesn't mean that our standard moral responsibility is not there. That we, it might seem like the internet causes a distance between us and reality, but it's still the same thing. If you're acting bad on the internet, it's no different than acting bad in person.
All right, that was an excerpt of my conversation with Gord Pennycook, an assistant professor of behavioral science at the University of Regina. And basically on the way to the studio today, you said exactly the same thing. He said, often people do things on the internet that they wouldn't do in face-to-face situations. And that's exactly what you said.
I have friends that have kids, and the bullying that goes on the internet is extraordinary. Bullying that would never even happen. I mean, there's bullying in schoolyards and stuff. But the fact of the matter is that what people are saying to each other on the internet would get you a punch in the mouth in the schoolyard. Yeah. And people seem they are immune to it all. And the other interesting thing to me is the word he's talking about reality and virtual reality. I thought virtual meant real. But in fact, in this day and age, it's Alice in Wonderland. Virtual means unreal, right?
Well, yeah, that's it. The word
it's really weird.
Changed. The word has changed.
Yeah, it's completely changed. But it's Alice in Wonderland. It's through the looking glass.
But he also said something interesting. These people who post and blogs and stuff on the internet and Instagram and things like that, he said they're trying to create an alternative image of themselves, one that is more exciting than they actually are. Look at me, I'm doing this, I'm here, I'm that. And he said perhaps there's peer pressure from followers to continually do something more interesting or more exciting. And that may be what is pushing some people to forget the fact that what they're doing, in some cases, is unpleasant, stupid, antisocial, or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's very troublesome to see the total lack of empathy.
Yeah.
Empathy disappearing. It's like
because it's only a screen.
Yeah.
It's only a screen, or it's only this. I mean, and so there's no real vibration, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's what he said also. He says in the full interview, not necessarily in the excerpt, but he says, if I said something bad to you, I would see your reaction that I'd hurt you. And you'd say, you'd step back. Yeah. But when you're doing it virtually, you're typing things and so on and saying, well, you're a goof. And
oh, right. So it's completely, it's not incorporated. It's only up in your head.
And he said, you have to realize that when you are on the internet, you are talking to another person. There is another person there.
Yeah.
And you have to realize that just because it's the internet, bad behavior in real life is no different than bad behavior on the internet. So that's something to think about. Coming up, we're going to talk about dinosaurs and birds. Okay, it's now widely accepted that the birds we know today have evolved from dinosaurs. They're the descendants. But how did we get from the rough skin of dinosaurs to flight feathers that could lift these creatures into the air? Well, that is the question I asked of paleontologist and Professor Scott Persons, formerly of the University of Alberta.
Well, that's a fascinating question. So the oldest dinosaurs that give us evidence of feathers, the feathers that they've got are far less complicated than feathers as we tend to think of them today. They're these simple hair-like structures, and their function covering the body certainly must have been insulation. That is, they were there to hold in body heat that the dinosaur was producing in order to keep it warm.
So the original feathers were sort of a variation on fur in a way.
In a way, they were very, very similar to fur, right? They had evolved to serve the same function. Now, understand, they did not evolve from fur. They're not classified as a kind of fur. Rather, mammals develop fur and dinosaurs develop feathers independently, but for the same reason.
Now, you also noticed in your study that feathers developed as a sexual thing, not necessarily to fly.
That's right. So going from, there's sort of a big jump there between these simple filamentous, very, very hair-like feathers, and the really complex ones that you need in order to form a surface that will help you to actually fly and defy gravity. But to get from the simple to the complex, you need an intermediate function. And in our paper, we offered the suggestion that that function was sexual display. If you think of, say, the fans of a peacock on its tail, or you think of a turkey, or the big crest of a cockatoo, those are complex feathers that aren't being used for flight. Got nothing to do with helping the bird get off the ground, but they are used as flashy, showy sexual display structures. So sexual display makes for a great intermediate step.
Now, Professor Persons, how did we get from insulation to sexual display to actually flying?
The scenario, we think, probably went down like this. You had a bunch of dinosaurs that benefited from having insulation, just holding in their body heat. So they're not wasting the energy that they burn to heat themselves up. They're holding it in. And naturally, there's sexual pressures to be flashy, to get attention, to be novel. And so in some dinosaurs, they developed longer, stiffer feathers, things that stuck out away from the body in obtrusive places like on the arms and on the tip of the tail. And they sort of developed in rows so that when you flashed it from the side, you had a broad sort of canvas, a big, impressive structure to look at. And then, lo and behold, in one particular group of dinosaurs that was climbing up in the trees, having an ecology that's not so terribly different from modern-day squirrels, as they were jumping from branch to branch, it happened to be that already possessing these broad, lightweight, feathery fans on the arms and the tail, well, that helped you if you ever missed the jump and you wanted to parachute down out of the trees a little bit, or if you wanted to jump a little bit further and glide just a bit, say, in pursuit of a flying insect, or to make a longer jump so your predators can't catch you. So already having these sexual display structures turned out to be very beneficial in that context. And once you're developing your feathers for the functions of parachuting and gliding, it's an easy step from there on up to true flight.
Well, so there you have it. Feathers and flights and birds developed partially anyway for sex.
Oh, feathers are beautiful. They certainly attract attention. Hey, we have our faithful friends listening to us, a lot of them. Mubashir Hussein Asher from Pakistan.
Okay.
And Gustavo Lucas. We also have Krzysztof Sajewicz from Poland.
Dzień dobry.
Yeah. Yaidi Torak Leva from Cuba, and Israr Hamad Shahadi. They're saying hi.
Oh, well.
Yay.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. Hello.
We're happy to have you.
Now, your topic today was a world record.
Yes, exactly. In a little village in Quebec called Warwick, they made the biggest poutine ever made. Now, what is a poutine? It's a very typical, one of the most famous Quebecois dish, we would say. And actually, I wanted to our listeners to see it, and we have one that we can eat here.
So this
I ordered one from the cafeteria, and we're gonna taste it. So we'll
do we get delivery?
Yeah, we got actually delivery, and you know what? We're gonna have Pierre Dutil.
Oh, man, the man who made, I'm telling you,
the
mysterious place goes nowhere without Dutil. This whole building, he's got his finger on the pulse of this whole building. He does it all. He's working his way up to the 22nd floor.
Wait.
Come on in.
Have to come on in.
Please.
You have to come on in.
We got a shot of here.
We have
Where
to
he is. Where he is. Hey! Pierre Dutil, ladies and gentlemen.
This is our mysterious Pierre Dutil.
So this is the famous poutine. It's French fries, which are potatoes fried in oil, covered with a very Quebecois cheese curds.
Cheese curds.
And topped with a gravy.
It's also
It's
heart attack in a bowl.
Lots
awful,
of calories.
see?
So,
God.
So we have here two-person, Mark and Terry, who never tasted it. I can't believe it.
now. I'm not
you don't
having
want
it.
to?
Do we have force?
Anyways, in Warwick last weekend, they made the world's biggest poutine. It was a Guinness record. It weighed over 3,000 kilograms.
3,000
So
kilograms.
it was an extra cheese poutine. There was 1,000 kilogram of cheese, 1,000 liters of gravy, and I don't know how much potatoes.
Let's hear it for
we have.
mankind,
No,
ladies
there
and
it is.
gentlemen. Oh, there they are.
kilograms.
Okay.
Here we go.
Oh my God.
If you're
my.
listening to us on the internet,
But-
you have to go to Facebook.
Yeah, you
and-
gotta see
and look
this.
on look at the show.
Yeah.
This is the whole town
look at
gathering
that.
for
But
the
now,
cheese
of
curds.
course, the money that they made from selling it was $10 to attend. There was over 6,000 people
Okay.
there, and all the proceeds went to the local hospital. And it was organized by 3 local cheese producers. That's Centre du Québec, the region, and that's
Okay.
where that cheese come from. Now the trick is a good poutine has a squeaky cheese. When you eat it, it should squeak.
We need sound effects. Squeak, squeak.
Yeah. So, yeah, here we go. I'll do the squeaky test.
I'll have to try this then.
Not me.
It's pretty
Careful,
squeaky.
careful, Montgomery. Watch where you point
Yeah.
that thing.
You have to taste it. It's
It
very
was-
good with beer or with Coca-Cola. Oh, did I give
No,
you
no,
a
no. Je
fork?
passe. Je vais passer. Non. Je
So,
veux pas.
Tell me,
Vraiment, non.
you didn't,
No,
you didn't
no.
live all your life in Quebec, right?
No, I did not.
And wherever you were, did you ever hear about poutine or? were
Not
you-
till I got to Quebec. Although they're selling
Okay.
it in Manhattan right now, I believe.
Well,
yeah.
it's starting to become.
It's catching on. It's
known.
going to be our legacy to the world.
It's
Our-
more than starting. I mean, it's
Poutine.
very.
Ladies and gentlemen, here it is.
And
Poutine.
here I thought the Canadian invention of a bloody Caesar was our gift to the world.
We
unusual.
invented the Bloody Caesar?
We did.
That's an opening line if I ever heard one. Right?
No, but we did. We did. A bloody Caesar is a Canadian thing.
What's the difference between a Bloody Mary and a Bloody Caesar?
Clamato.
Oh, it's just a difference in it's tomato versus clamato.
Can we
No.
get back on the subject?
Okay,
here?
sorry. Okay.
All right.
Go ahead. Have
So
some.
this weekend there is actually starting now, and all weekend there's a Poutine Fest in Old Montreal, and there's going to be more than 40 recipes. So of course this is like the standard poutine, which was created in the 50s. There's a war between Drummondville and Warwick to know who actually invented the poutine, but that's another completely other story. But now they make poutine with all sorts of things. You can have an Italian poutine with spaghetti sauce. You can have poutine with pulled pork, with ground beef and peas. Name it. So
It's the combo that makes it a poutine, right? The cheese and the
cheese,
French fries.
the cheese, the gravy, and the French. I find it very interesting that the proceeds go to the local hospital because I wonder how many
You
people
can have a heart attack.
heart
Yeah.
attack after
That's
eating
right. I mean,
this.
So, Mark, it's your first time eating it too. Do you like it?
Oh yeah, it's pretty good.
Isn't it good?
Oh yeah, it's pretty good.
I have one poutine every 5 years.
is this it?
Well, actually, I had it last year, so now I'm gonna have to wait.
Okay,
like
so
10
now you have
years
to.
for the
Okay,
next one.
okay.
But
Yeah, because you don't have an ounce. I mean, you are thin. You are in shape.
yeah,
It must be the cello playing.
because I don't eat poutine every day. That's
Well,
why.
Well,
So anyway, if you're listening, have wherever you're listening, whether it's in Pakistan or Poland or Saskatchewan for that matter, have you heard of poutine? And does
How about Ontario, Mark? Do they eat poutine there?
well they know it there because of their proximity, and of course there's a large portion of Eastern Ontario, especially, that has strong francophone
ties, yeah.
francophone influence. Not necessarily Quebec, but there are a large proportion of people in Eastern Ontario who are francophone. Mm-hmm. So they would know about it certainly as well from, if nothing else, from the media. But how widely known is this? It's getting widely known, as are Montreal bagels, Montreal smoked meat, Bloody Caesars, and there's a couple of desserts, Klondike bars or s'mores or something that are Canadian. What I want to have is Saskatoon berries.
Yeah.
that's the first healthy thing you've mentioned. What's up with
Well,
Saskatoon
we have
berries?
Canadian whiskey.
Canadian whiskey, maple syrup, of course.
Okay.
Which is,
Okay.
entirely. Although, and the trouble is,
Let's
there are a lot of pretenders, and you have to be very careful when you're buying maple syrup that it is in fact maple syrup, because there's a lot of stuff that is labeled as pancake syrup and things like that, which you have to be aware of because they're not maple syrup. Anyway, that's about all the time we have for the show for today. We don't want to have a heart attack on air. So for Marie Claude, Terry, Pierre, Marc-André, and Benoit, thank you for joining us this week, and watch the calories.
Watch the heart attacks.
Yeah. The Putin at the Radio Canada.